Hey everyone, it's FrSky Steve, and I do welcome you back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about something kind of fun. We're going to be talking about using flight modes to give us different options for flaps. So what I'm going to do is, hopefully this time when we talk about flight modes, it's a little bit more easy to comprehend. So where do we find flight modes? You go into the airplane icon right here and you go into flight modes. As you can see, I built 3 flight modes and they all fit on one switch. That is switch B. So whenever I move switch B around, the flight modes move around. Now, what I'll also show you is that when I move switch B around, you can see that takeoff, cruise, landing, you get the idea, right? So go back into flight modes, and flight modes are pretty basic. So inside of here, we go into edit. All it is a name and a switch position, and switch B down is landing, switch B middle is cruise, and switch B up is takeoff. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. The anatomy of a flight: you take off, you fly around for a while, and you land. No, I do know that you probably have a lot more to do in the air than just cruising. A lot of times people want high rates and low rates, and maybe there's other flight modes you'd like to have as well. But to keep it simple, we're just working with 3 today. Okay, so now the rest of this is just talking about the mixes. Go inside the mixer, and what I've done is a couple different things. I did set up flaps, and by default when you set up flaps, it just says flaps. So I went into, let's go into edit, and I gave it the name takeoff flap. So right away you know that we're talking about something different. This pertains only for flaps on takeoff, and you can see right away this is a radically different curve than anything I've ever done before. So it goes from 0 to 15% to 20%. And what I did is I created a curve called TO flaps, and go into edit. You can see exactly how I do it. It's 3 points. It's a custom curve. 0%, 15%, 20%. And if you need more information about how flaps work, there's better videos. I have videos out on this topic. I got probably 3 or 4 different videos. Jose has videos. There's a lot of videos for Ethos and flaps. You can see also that my slow up and slow down is pretty. I have 7 seconds, which is insanely slow. And what will happen is if I were to try to use the flaps here, you'll see that, hey, this doesn't look right. It's because we're on the wrong flight mode. All right. Now that we're back into the takeoff flight mode, you can see that it deploys to 15%. And then when you go one more time, it goes to 20%, and then it retracts pretty quickly. And just to reinforce, I do not use the 30% weights, which are default. I changed everything to 100%. I rather work with curves and whole values for weights as opposed to how they're set up by defaults. Now, landing flaps is something very different. So this one, I wanted to have a little bit more options. First of all, the curve looks very different. And also you see that I changed it from takeoff flaps to landing flaps. These are 2 completely different sets of curves. So what I had to do was I had to go in here and create yet another curve, and this is a custom curve. It's also 3 points, but this time it's 35% and 60%. I figured 35% is a pretty nice cruise around. I can have the flaps down, and I can still, it's not taking the plane so slow that it interferes with the landing. And then when I'm lined up at the runway, I can drop it to 60% flaps, give it a little more throttle, and have hopefully a nice smooth landing on the runway. Okay, so you've got that. About the only thing that, let's get out of here, you understand how that works. My slow up and slow down this time are different. I have 4 seconds instead of 7 seconds. But other than that, everything else is pretty much the way you remembered it. Flap channels are the same. The switch positions. The same switch positions that worked with the takeoff flap are the same switch positions that work with the landing flaps. So not much has changed as far as that's concerned. Now that we have that, you can kind of see how, the big question is, okay, I understand this guy Steve has a takeoff flap. I understand he has a landing flap. How do you let the radio know which one you want to use? All right, so we'll go back into takeoff flaps one more time. And there's something here we skipped right over. And right below, actually right above the inputs, you see this thing where it says flight modes. And you will not see this if you don't have flight modes activated. But we'll set it up. And what I did is, by default, all this is turned on. I turned off everything. What this means is that this particular curve only works in flight modes that are the takeoff flight mode. It does not work with the cruise flight mode. It does not work with the landing flight mode. So it's just takeoff. And then on the landing flight mode, or landing flap curve, or flap mix, I should say, I went in here and I turned it on for 2 flight modes. I set up for cruise and also for land. Occasionally, not very often, I wanted to put flaps on when I'm flying around, especially if I find a thermal. So it's up to you if you want to use this or not. Perhaps you just want to turn it off altogether. The thing that you have to keep in mind, if you want to turn this off, I have turned it off on some planes, but what I did was I retracted the flaps so that it doesn't accidentally stay down the whole flight and while you're in cruise mode. So the thing you got to keep in mind is, let's say you had the flaps all the way down for your takeoff flight mode and you left it on there, and then you go into your landing flight mode. Well, guess what? Your flaps are now at 60%, and it's going to be a lot of fun until you remember to switch the flaps off. So I like them in cruise mode also, just from the respect that it will remind you while you're up in the air and perhaps at a nice, comfortable altitude that maybe you need to retract your flaps. Okay, so that's how I did that. And what happens is you can see that when the takeoff flaps are active, nothing else is active. The landing flaps are not active. And we can have more fun because that whole thing of turning things on and off of flight modes, we can do some seriously psychotic things here. Like you can go in here and you can practice your dead stick landings, because when you go into your landing flight mode, your throttle doesn't work anymore. Probably not the best idea, but just it's an example that when you can see the throttle is on, but when I go into the landing flight mode, all of a sudden throttle is missing. So probably not the best idea to do that. Let's find something a little more productive to do with flight modes. Okay, so we're gonna go down to a couple other things I set up. I have this thing, I like aileron rudder mixing because sometimes I'm just pretty lazy, and I always want to have a little bit of rudder mixing, and sometimes I forget to do it. And now that I think of it, sometimes I want this on cruise, but sometimes I want it on takeoff as well, right? And so I'm going to turn it on. It's your choice. You can turn these things on and off when you feel like it. The idea is that whenever I work the ailerons, the rudder will also do some mixing and help prevent adverse yaw. So there's a reason why we might want to use it for a couple flight modes, but not all of them. And the last one is the flap to elevator mix. So this is useful when you have a plane that when you put the flaps down, the plane balloons. I think I've done videos on this before, but what happens is people always get this wrong because they always want to use the input as the switch they use for flaps, which in this case is switch A. You don't want to use that. You want to use channels, and you want to use the flap channels, one of the flap channels, right? Because what it will do is your elevator will mimic the travel of your flaps, and You go down here when you want to give it more or less elevator, you change this value. And it's trial and error, but after a few times adjusting it, you usually get it. And with that, I think we're getting closer to the end. If there's anything else we'd like to cover, I think we covered everything. But if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a message in the comments. And I do thank you for watching.